This is the skeleton in Ron Paul's closet. This is from the Ron Paul newsletter, the February 1990 edition. Quote, "Boy, it sure burns me to have a national holiday for that pro-communist philanderer, Martin Luther King. I voted against this outrage time and time again as a congressman. What an infamy that Ronald Reagan approved it. We can thank him for our annual Hate Whitey Day." This is from the Ron Paul report from October of 1992. Quote, "If you live in a major city, you've probably already heard about the newest threat to your life and limb and your family, carjacking. It is the hip-hop thing to do among the urban youth who play unsuspecting whites like pianos. What can you do? More and more Americans are carrying a gun in the car. An ex-cop I know advises that if you have to use a gun on a youth, you should leave the scene immediately, disposing of the wiped-off gun as soon as possible. Such a gun cannot, of course, be registered to you, but one bought privately through the classifieds, for example. I frankly don't know what to make of such advice, but even in my little town of Lake Jackson, Texas, I've urged everyone in my family to know how to use a gun in self-defense. For the animals are coming." The New Republic a few years ago also unearthed this gem from the Ron Paul newsletters on the subject of foreign affairs. The end of apartheid's white rule in South Africa, described in a Ron Paul newsletter as, quote, "a destruction of civilization that was the most tragic to ever occur on that continent, at least below the Sahara." Again, these are all from Ron Paul's newsletters from the 1980s and 1990s. This is not a new issue for Ron Paul's political career. We have known about these newsletters for a long time. He has been called to account for the wildly racist and conspiratorial passages in his old newsletters every time they have been unearthed periodically over the last 15 years or so. When Ron Paul ran for Congress again in 1996, after being home in Texas for a few years, the Dallas Morning News pulled a couple of passages from a 1992 issue of the Ron Paul Political Report. Quote, "If you have ever been robbed by a black teenaged male, you know how unbelievably fleet of foot they can be. Also, given the inefficiencies of what D.C. laughingly calls the criminal justice system, I think we can safely assume that 95% of the black males in that city are semi-criminal or entirely criminal." These were quotes from Ron Paul's newsletters. And when the Dallas Morning News asked him about them running for Congress that year, he did not disavow these statements. Quote, "In the interview, he did not deny he made the statement about the swiftness of black men. If you try to catch someone that has stolen a purse from you, there is no chance to catch them," Dr. Paul said. He also said the comment about black men in the nation's capital was made while writing about a 1992 study produced by the National Center on Incarceration and Alternatives, a criminal justice think tank based in Virginia. Quote, "These aren't my figures," Dr. Paul said Tuesday. "That is the assumption you can gather from the report." When the Houston Chronicle started asking about those comments, also in 1996, Dr. Paul's campaign spokesman defended the remarks about the criminality of black men. Thusly, he said that the Reverend Jesse Jackson had also talked about urban crime, so essentially that made it okay. So that's how Ron Paul and his political campaign responded to criticism about nakedly racist passages in his newsletters when he was asked about them during his congressional campaign in the mid-90s. He responded essentially by defending those nakedly racist passages. And that was not enough to kill Ron Paul's political career. Quite to the contrary. He won the election that year in '96. He went back to Congress, and he has been there ever since. And right now, Ron Paul is having the biggest political surge of his career. He's the front runner in most of the Iowa polling. There is a reasonable chance he could win the Iowa caucuses in a week and a half. But now, in the face of the scrutiny that early state frontrunner status brings, Congressman Ron Paul has come up with a totally different explanation for what's in his old racist Ron Paul newsletters.
You know, I didn't write him, and I don't endorse those views, and I've explained it many times.
So you read them, but you didn't do anything about it at the time?
I never read that stuff. I've never read it. I was probably aware of it 10 years after it was written. And it's been going on 20 years that people have pestered me about this.
In 1996, Ron Paul defended the black men are fast and criminal writings in his newsletters. Today he says not only did he not write that stuff, he didn't even read it. That's at least what he told CNN before, in the middle of the interview, he took off his microphone and stormed away, walked away. It is hard to believe that Ron Paul didn't see this coming, that he didn't think he'd need a good explanation while running for president for the fact that advice on how to shoot black young people without getting caught for it appeared under his big bold-faced name, as if he had written it, excuse me. But after first defending this stuff in 1996, Ron Paul's defense on this stuff is just sort of slowly evolved, changing over time to make him seem less and less culpable. In a 2001 interview with Texas Monthly, he reversed what he had said 5 years earlier, claimed he didn't actually write any of the racist stuff from his newsletters. By 2008, he had decided that not only had he not written that stuff himself, he didn't even know who had written it.
How did this stuff get in these Ron Paul newsletters? Who wrote it?
Well, I have no idea. Have you ever heard of a publisher of a magazine not knowing every single thing? The editor is responsible for the daily activities, and people came and go, and there were some people that were hired. I don't know any of their names. I do not, absolutely honestly, do not know who wrote those things.
Did you used to read these newsletters, Congressman?
Not back then. There might have been at times I would, at times, but you know, I was in a medical practice. I traveled a lot. I was doing speeches around the country, so very frequently, you know, I never did see these. Matter of fact, some of the things you just read, I wouldn't have recognized them.
All of the candidates who could conceivably win Iowa this year, Ron Paul and Newt Gingrich and Mitt Romney, they've all been in politics for a really long time. And they all have scandals in their past, perhaps none as scandalous as having overtly racist, violent diatribes written in your name. But what is reanimating this old dusty skeleton in Ron Paul's closet right now is not just the substantive disgust for what this scandal is. It's frankly Ron Paul's incoherent, inconsistent explanations for how it happened. He's supposedly Mr. Integrity, Mr. Consistent, right? His multiple stories and his unwillingness to explain this clearly, to clear it up in a way that seems credible, is what is giving this controversy new life, less than 2 weeks out from the Iowa race that polls now show him leading. Political science professor and MSNBC contributor Melissa Harris Perry will join us to help unpack all of that Ron Paul baggage next.
I was still practicing medicine. That was probably why I wasn't a very good publisher, because I had to make a living.
If not being a good publisher means letting people put out how to shoot black people without getting caught instructions under your name, then put Congressman Ron Paul down as not a good publisher. Joining us now is Melissa Harris Perry, political science professor at Tulane University, an MSNBC contributor, and tonight's guest host of The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Melissa, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it'll be good.
Good to have you here. Ron Paul's defense when he is asked about this scandal now is that this is very far in the past. This is a settled matter. Why is everybody still talking about it? What's your reaction to that?
Well, you know, there's so many ways that Ron Paul is America, and it's one of the reasons that I always have been an engaged Paul watcher. I was talking to my daughter earlier, who's 10, and reminding her that when she was 6, she got a copy of the Constitution from Ron Paul in New Hampshire. We were there for the primaries. He handed it to her, and you know, we still have it because he really is this sort of "I am America," but that is also sort of America's response to the entire history of institutionalized racism. Let's not talk about that. Let's not think about that. That was in some time in the past. I'm now this remade thing. And so we don't have to cope with any of the residual realities of American racism. So I actually feel like on the one hand, it's easy to beat up on Paul, but he's part of, symptomatic of something larger.
That said, this has got his name on it.
That's right.
And I mean, I guess the cheapest possible objection to this is, dude, you let people put out a newsletter with your name on it and you didn't even bother to read it? It doesn't sound like a very effective manager. I mean, that's the cheapest possible approach to it. But I mean, the other part of this, what's happening politically here, is that Ron Paul knew that this scandal was out there. He knows that he's been getting asked about it since at least the mid-90s. Yeah. And he knows that he doesn't have a coherent explanation for what happened here. Right. Didn't bother to come up with one even while running for president again. Is he banking on people not caring about it, or is that sort of dereliction of duty, politically speaking?
No, I think, so I agree. The cheap, seats are, well, you put out a newsletter and you didn't know, what it said, or you're just sort of a bad politician. No, this smacks of someone who fundamentally believes in the inequality of African Americans and probably other people of color relative to whites, and a belief that white Americans should have a right to behave in a way that represents what he would understand as freedom, but that freedom doesn't stop at or it doesn't have to respect the freedom of people of color. And so you don't have to quite work up a political explanation for it because it's a deeply ingrained belief. It's part of his sort of ideological adherence. So I don't think it's about being a bad politician. I think it's about believing that if some black kid wants to take your car, you have a right to kill that person.
The Ron Paul defense is that he didn't write this stuff. It was essentially irresponsible. I guess you might even concede it was irresponsible that somebody did it in his name, but that he doesn't believe these racist sentiments. Now, that said, when the 1964 Civil Rights Act was getting commemorated for its 40th anniversary in Congress, Ron Paul voted against it, describing the Civil Rights Act as an unconscionable expansion of government power, saying it reduced liberty. So, I mean, nobody says that they've ever seen Ron Paul behave or speak in a way that makes him seem like an overtly racist guy. He denies that these overtly racist things were authored by him. But at what point does his civil rights and race track record intersect with his defense?
Well, look, it's under his name and it's written down. You and I both exist in a business where we write collaboratively, we present ideas collaboratively.
Yeah.
You know, it's your head, you know, from here up saying the words, but it's part of a collaborative process. But you take responsibility for it once it comes out of your mouth. You don't turn around and say, oh, that was my segment producer. I don't actually really think those things.
Right.
No, that's your responsibility. And so I think we can lay this right at his feet for justice. We don't need him to say, oh, yes, of course, I believe that. He need not be David Duke, who will openly say, oh, yes, I was a member of the Klan and all of this. He can simply be the person who, under his name, allowed this to be public.
And when he says, I disavow it, how far does that go? What else does he have to do to prove that he really means that he disavows it?
Well, I mean, I think at a minimum, I would like to hear the reasons that these arguments are either inaccurate or wrong. I mean, there needs to be some reasoning. Ron Paul, whatever else he is incredibly good at giving reasoned arguments, often based in kind of American historical, constitutional language. Let's hear that argument for racial equality.
I think that would be the way that he could put this away. Otherwise, I think this might mean the end for him. That's what I think about it anyway. Melissa Harris-Perry, political science professor at Tulane, MSNBC contributor, guest host of The Last Word at the top of the hour.
2 minutes.
I know. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Thanks. All right. Still to come here.